Hello, MMA fans. Get ready to witness the most bone-crushing moments in UFC history. We have witnessed countless fights that ended with a fighter lying unconscious on the mat. Some of these knockouts were so violent that they left us speechless, shocked, and amazed. In this video, we will count down the top 10 most brutal knockouts in UFC history based on the impact, the technique, and the aftermath of the finish. Let's get started. Number 10. Francis Ngannou versus Alistair Overeem, UFC 218. We begin our list with a knockout that happened in 2017, when Francis Ngannou faced Alistair Overeem in a heavyweight clash. Ngannou was a rising star in the division, while Overeem was a veteran with over 60 fights under his belt. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes, but it was enough for Ngannou to land one of the most devastating uppercuts ever seen in MMA. Ngannou caught Overeem with a left hook, then followed up with a right uppercut that lifted Overeem off his feet and sent him crashing to the canvas. Overeem was out cold before he hit the ground, and Ngannou added a hammer fist for good measure. The knockout earned Ngannou a title shot and a reputation as one of the most powerful punchers in the sport. Number 9. Lyoto Machida versus Vitor Belfort, UFC 224. Next, we have a knockout that happened in 2018, when Lyoto Machida faced Vitor Belfort in a middleweight bout. Both fighters were former champions and legends of the sport, but they were also past their prime and looking for a win. The fight was a chess match, with both fighters respecting each other's skills and waiting for an opening. That opening came in the second round, when Machida unleashed a front kick that landed flush on Belfort's chin. Belfort collapsed to the floor motionless, and Machida bowed in respect. The kick was reminiscent of the one that Anderson Silva used to knock out Belfort in 2011, but this one was even more precise and brutal. Number 8. Tank Abbott versus Steve Nelmark, Ultimate 1996. Now, we go back to the early days of UFC when the rules were minimal and the fighters were wild. Tank Abbott was one of the most notorious brawlers in the history of the sport, and he had a knack for knocking out his opponents with vicious haymakers. One of his most memorable knockouts came in 1996, when he faced Steve Nelmark in a tournament. Nelmark was a wrestler who tried to take Abbott down, but he made a fatal mistake. He left his head exposed, and Abbott grabbed it and pulled it into a crucifix position. From there, Abbott rained down elbow after elbow, until Nelmark's neck twisted in a horrifying angle, and he went limp. The referee stopped the fight, and Abbott celebrated by throwing Nelmark's lifeless body to the side. Number 7. Holm versus Ronda Rousey, UFC 193. Moving on, we have a knockout that shocked the world in 2015, when Holm faced Ronda Rousey in a women's bantamweight title fight. Rousey was the undefeated champion and the biggest star in the sport, while Holm was a former boxer and kickboxer who was considered a huge underdog. The fight was expected to be a quick and easy win for Rousey, who had finished all of her previous opponents in the first round. In the second round, Holm delivered the final blow, a head kick that connected with Rousey's neck and sent her tumbling to the mat. Holm followed up with a few punches, and the referee waved off the fight. Holm became the new champion, and Rousey suffered her first and most devastating loss. Number 6. Kevin Lee versus Gregor Gillespie, UFC 244. Next up, we have a knockout that happened in 2019, when Kevin Lee faced Gregor Gillespie in a lightweight bout. Lee was a former title-choosing streak, while Gillespie was an undefeated wrestler who was rising in the rankings. The fight was a fast, however, it ended abruptly in the first round, when Lee landed a perfect combination that floored Gillespie. Lee threw an overhand right that stunned Gillespie, then followed up and sent him falling backwards. Gillespie was out before he hit the ground, and Lee celebrated his impressive comeback win. Number 5. Gary Goodridge versus Paul Herrera, UFC 8. Now we return to the old school UFC when the fighters wore no gloves and the fights were no holds barred. Gary Goodridge was a Canadian kickboxer who made his MMA debut in 1996 when he entered a tournament at UFC 8. His first opponent was Paul Herrera, a wrestler who had a significant size and strength advantage. The fight started with Herrera shooting for a takedown, but Goodridge sprawled and trapped him in a crucifix position. From there, Goodridge unleashed a barrage of elbows that smashed Herrera's face and knocked him out in just 13 seconds. The knockout was so brutal that it earned Goodridge the nickname Big Daddy and a place in the UFC Hall of Fame. Number 4. Jorge Masvidal versus Ben Askren, UFC 239. Moving on, we have a knockout that broke the record for the fastest finish in UFC history, when Jorge Masvidal faced Ben Askren in a welterweight bout in 2019. Masvidal was a veteran striker who had a resurgence in his career, while Askren was an undefeated wrestler who had just joined the UFC. As soon as the bell rang, Masvidal sprinted across the cage and jumped in the air, launching a flying knee that smashed Askren's head and knocked him out cold. Masvidal added 2 more punches, then walked away with a smirk. The knockout was so fast and so brutal that it left everyone in awe, and Masvidal became a superstar overnight. Number 3. Edson Barboza versus Terry Etim, UFC 142. Next, we have a knockout that happened in 2012, when Edson Barboza faced Terry Etim in a lightweight bout. Barboza was a Brazilian kickboxer who was known for his lethal leg kicks, while Etim was a British grappler who was looking to test his striking. The fight was a back-and-forth battle, with both fighters landing some hard shots and showing their toughness. However, it ended in spectacular fashion in the 3rd round, when Barboza unleashed a spinning wheel kick that caught Etim on the jaw and sent him falling like a tree. Etim was stiff as a board, and Barboza celebrated his amazing knockout. The kick was so beautiful and so brutal that it won the Knockout of the Year award and is still considered one of the best knockouts in UFC history. Number 2, Anderson Silva versus Chris Weidman, UFC 162. Now, we have a knockout that shocked the world in 2013 when Anderson Silva faced Chris Weidman in a middleweight title fight. Silva was the reigning champion and the greatest fighter of all time, while Weidman was an undefeated challenger who had a wrestling background. The fight was expected to be another dominant performance by Silva, who had defended his belt 10 times and had not lost in the UFC. Silva, as usual, taunted and mocked his opponent, dropping his hands and inviting him to hit him. Weidman obliged and landed a left hook that clipped Silva on the chin and dropped him to the mat. Weidman followed up with a few more punches, and the referee stopped the fight. Weidman became the new champion, and Silva suffered his first and most shocking loss. Number 1. Dan Henderson versus Michael Bisping, UFC 100. And finally, we have the knockout that tops our list, the one that happened in 2009, when Dan Henderson faced Michael Bisping in a middleweight bout. The fight was a grudge match, as the two fighters had coached against each other in the 9th season of the reality show and had a heated rivalry. In the 2nd round, Henderson landed a right hand that rocked Bisping, then followed up with another right hand that knocked him out cold. Henderson added a flying forearm for good measure, and the referee stopped the fight. Henderson celebrated his stunning knockout, and Bisping was left unconscious on the mat. The knockout was so brutal and so iconic that it became Henderson's signature move and is still considered one of the best knockouts in UFC history. That's it for our list of the top 10 most brutal knockouts in UFC history. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more MMA content. Thanks for watching.